If I ask you to name a serial killer, you will probably come up with a list of names like Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, or even the famous Jack the Ripper, who in combination accumulated over 50 victims. Needless to say, all three of them are famous cases who've had multiple documentaries and other media made about them. Now, what if I told you the most prolific serial killer of all time, with over 300 suspected victims, is not only someone we don't know that much about, but that the incredible mystery surrounding his case makes it one of the darkest stories of the 20th century. Welcome. Our story begins in 1992, Pereira, Colombia. A young boy, later identified as Juan Carlos, is found near the train tracks of the city. Encased by an ever-growing crowd, his body is covered in a big white sheet of paper that was already there when they found him, almost as if he was sleeping. But upon a closer examination, the top of his sheet was completely covered in blood and flies all over the body. After someone calls the police, it is later known that the body was in the mid stages of decomposition, so it's been there for quite a bit. In previous times, this homicide would have at least rattled the people of Pereira, but due to internal conflicts in Colombian politics and the hunt for Pablo Escobar, him still being the leader of the cartel of Medellin in 1992, Colombia is experiencing the highest rate of homicide in its history. What made Juan Carlos' murder case interesting to the police, however, was the unique and brutal way the body was made. Most of his internal organs were either exposed or missing through a tiny little cut in the stomach. This was incredibly rare and baffled a lot of detectives at the time. After every lead was exhausted, however, the police classified Juan Carlos' murder as a cold case, pretty much ending any interest gathered by the press at that point in time. But what no one knew at that moment is that this will be the beginning of the bloodiest murder spree committed by any one person in history, and the start of our mystery. John Alexander, age 11, killed around the same time as Juan Carlos, left in a ditch near a local farm. Jaime Andres, 7, killed shortly after John and was seen following a man moments before his disappearance. John, Jaime, and Juan and 11 more children were found between 1992 and 1993. All the children had the same age, and all of them were killed in the same way, dismembered and sexually abused. While this unexplainable murder spree was happening, very few people even attempted to connect the dots between the cases. A good reason might be that although similar in profile, all the victims lived in different provinces around Pereira. That means each case was most likely handled by a different jurisdiction. Only the Red Press of Colombia, name given to the kind of media that focuses only on reporting on violent crimes and murders, seemed to be even remotely interested in the story. Even the police hesitated to call these killings the act of a serial killer over the lack of evidence. However, by the middle 1995, the city of Pereira accumulated over 90 cases involving children that were either missing or found dead. Every single one of the cases shared the same 4 characteristics. All children were brought up in extreme poverty and unstable housing conditions, were aged between 8 and 4 years old, had signs of sexual abuse moments before their death, and all their bodies were missing internal organs. For any investigation, it is essential to establish an MO and a profile of the killer. However, in this case, it was extremely difficult. The reason why is because most children involved in this case were either homeless or were part of a human trafficking ring in Colombia. In short, having a positive ID to the victim is incredibly difficult. Within the police department, people began to worry that the individual or group responsible for these murders will never be found, or that they would just escape. Their nightmares were confirmed. September 12, 1995. A common grave was found by the police of Quito, Ecuador. What will become obvious of these murders later on is that they not only mimic the MO of recent murders in Colombia, but all the victims are also physically similar to other murders. Nothing about these murders will be connected to the murders in Colombia until much, much later, like 2017 kinda late. What becomes incredibly clear after murders spread to Ecuador is that whoever is responsible has no intentions of stopping. So far, for the police, the bodies keep piling up. People are beginning to ask questions about why cases are not being solved, and the silence from local authorities and the government is deafening. The number one question in everyone's minds is, when will this end? When all hope seemed lost, an incredible breakthrough happens, seemingly out of nowhere. The following comes directly from one of the officers closest to the investigations in Colombia. He later gave an interview to a group of researchers. His statement reads, "In 1997, we found 36 bodies near some farmland near Medellin, Colombia. Similar to the MO and the characteristics of other murders, most of the corpses were children, sexually abused, but no fingerprints or DNA were found, except for a note addressed to someone, a woman named Teresa. On a closer examination, it seemed to be a love letter, but what is more interesting is that the address in the letter was close enough from the current investigation that 2 officers were dispatched to the location. After a couple minutes of questioning, Teresa claimed she did not recognize the handwriting on the letter, but a few days after, she told the police she remembered something. A week ago, she went out with a man who, according to her, wasn't much to write home about. After a couple drinks, it was obvious Teresa wasn't into him, and she decided to leave. But the man insisted in walking her home, saying it was much too late. Against her best judgment, she said yes, and walked home together. What is incredibly terrifying is what Teresa said next. After arriving home and settling in, she noticed that the man had taken her mail. The name she gave the police was Luis Alfredo Garavito. When the police arrive to the home of Garavito, they don't find much. Some liquor bottles and a tiny black book. A black book with a list of names, times, and places that exactly correspond to 130 murder cases. In April 2nd, 1999, screams are heard by a local trash collector who seek refuge in an abandoned sector of old downtown Pereira to smoke a joint. Thinking there was an accident, the man approaches the source of screams, and what he finds is absolutely terrifying. Almost obstructed from view by a couple trees, he finds a kid who's been stripped naked, tied with a rope around his legs, and attempting to escape from a man who's slowly trying to get him inside an abandoned house. According to the rest of the police report, the man began to throw rocks to try to distract the criminal and yell for help. In the midst of the chaos, the kid managed to untie himself and escape from his captor, but not before he attempted to chase them with a knife. After outrunning the stranger, the kid alerts the police, who are able to apprehend the criminal pretty quickly. When questioned and asked for his name, he just says, "Luis, and I know you've been looking for me." Born in 1957 in the city of Geneva, Colombia, Luis Alfredo Garavito was raised during the biggest crime wave that the city of Pereira and perhaps Colombia has ever seen. Being sexually abused by his dad and family members, Garavito utilized alcohol and drugs later on in life to, quote, silence the demons of his past, something he also alluded to on his trial, when the judge asked him why he felt the need to harm people. His answer was, that is the only way to make people living in my head go away. After his capture, Garavito not only confessed to 114 murders, but also he took police to over 100 locations where children's remains were found. After a trial that was pretty much just for show, as Luis already confessed, he was sentenced to 1,853 years and 9 days in prison. Now, let's state the obvious. The capture of Luis Garavito was more of a lucky occurrence than an elaborated trap by the CTI. The CTI is Colombia's top criminal investigation branch of the government. By the time of his capture, Luis Garavito's murders went on for a really long time without being connected to each other, and a lot of contradicting evidence kept being released to the press by the CTI themselves. In fact, once you take a closer look at the evidence the police reported they had versus what they submitted to the court, it is really hard to understand how the police exactly got to convict Luis Garavito of so many murders. Until 1996, 3 years before Garavito's capture, the only evidence ever found and released to the public, even hinting that there was a serial killer on the loose, came from an official bulletin released by the local police of Pereira, who said, some objects found in the vicinity of the crime scenes indicate that most likely 2 people were involved. This statement is incredibly worrying, not only because Garavito has never claimed to have an accomplice, but also because the objects described in the official bulletin have never been found. What is even more shocking is the absence of records for many of the murders Garavito confessed to. Although we can find a lot of second-hand accounts about Garavito leading police to tens of common graves, no paper trail or police reports have ever been found either. Even when the prosecution brought some evidence that seemed irrefutable, details about the evidence itself definitely threw some red flags. For example, a pair of glasses matching Garavito's exact prescription were found in a common grave filled with the bodies of 12 children. However, the police never showed these glasses in court and its whereabouts remain a mystery. A pair of moccasins, also matching Luis's exact size, were also found in the scene of a crime. However, sources can't even agree on the type of shoe. Additionally, all over the internet you will read that Garavito's personal belongings supposedly contain a specific type of alcohol branding that was also found in the many graves of the children he presumably killed. The problem with this piece of evidence is that at no point was Luis Garavito's DNA found in any of the bottles. The more you dig about Luis Garavito, the more you understand that the story is full of holes. Although it's normal for the stories behind serial killers to become a little fuzzy over time, there are still quite a lot of unanswered questions about Garavito's whereabouts during the years of 1992 and 1999. Some explanations on why Garavito's case has not met a lot of scrutiny online is simply the complex politics around Colombia's Justice Department in 1991. During these years, Colombia's constitution gave the CTI supreme control on how cases against serial killers were handled internally. At any point in time, evidence could be kept from the public indefinitely. Also, according to Garavito's lawyers, it was incredibly hard to even speak with their clients before court dates. Additionally, the burden of proof is on the defense in this case, not the prosecution, which can be incredibly difficult when Garavito kept changing his story, breaking down during interviews, and yelling at the judges. So what's going on with Garavito today? He was recently transported to a medical hospital near the city of Valledupar after a suicide attempt and a 2020 diagnosis of leukemia. To this day, Garavito denies ever sexually abusing his victims. However, he also fully admits that the only reason why he killed anybody is because Satan was giving him orders to do so. The brutal way he killed his victims, the missing records of hundreds of missing children, and the lack of care by the Colombian police makes us wonder if Garavito acted alone. In fact, a lot of rumors circulating the media at the time stated that the missing children were in some way part of a satanic ritual that Garavito was reported to be part of. By any standards, Garavito's story is perhaps one of the most enigmatic cases behind any serial killer. The fact that this 22-year-old case has not generated more attention in the media is incredibly surprising to me, and one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video. I wonder, did all the 300 plus Colombian children murdered between 1992 and 1999 really fall to the hands of Garavito? Or was it an action of a second suspect? And if you believe there was another person involved in this murder, then let me ask you a question. Where do you think he is now?